what was the reason why you study everyday life?
It's very difficult to answer this question because there are different kind of motivations. First motivation was the following. Lukács, my teacher in his aesthetics, spoke about everyday relation to reality, but he spoke only about consciousness, about everyday thinking, contrasting it with scientific and artistic presentation. And I came to the conclusion that something is missing here. What is missing here, that everyday thinking is embedded in everyday life. When you speak about everyday thinking, you need to speak about everyday life itself. Second, it was Heidegger. I knew at that time Seinen Zeit. And I was really worried about Heidegger's position that in everyday life, you cannot be an authentic personality. That is, everyday life does not give you access to achieve your personality as an authentic personality. And I said something wrong is about this, because I think you can be an authentic personality in everyday life as well. Otherwise, women could have never attained the level of an authentic personality. So that was the third motivation. Women spent almost all their life in everyday life. They were not going out, they were not working on scientific level or on, they haven't created big artistic work, and they could still become authentic persons. So these were the three things which motivated me to think about everyday life at the first place.
The work of George Lucas, History and Social Conscience, is now 90 years old. What's the actuality of the work of George Lucas?
Philosophical work have no such a thing as actuality. Philosophical works, if they are good and deep, they will be always read, even if we think about all matters differently than a philosopher did. Just as we can read Plato, although we do not believe that before our birth we have seen the ideas somewhere up there, we do not need to read with pleasure Lukács's History and Class Consciousness, although we know that basically nothing of his suggestion proved right and can be repeated anymore. So Lukács' position is no more relevant, but the way of his argumentations and the problem he raised, the problem he addressed, remain relevant even if his solutions are no more relevant.
Do you think that right now we can still find solutions that are relevant in this cause, and some call it postmodernity?
Okay, you say there are many suggestions can be considered relevant. When you say postmodernity, you already raised a question, you refer to a concept which is now considered to be relevant. When you speak about post-metaphysics, you refer to a concern, to a problem which is now relevant. But if we refer to history and class consciousness and speak about the difference between empirical and Zugerechnetes, that is another kind of consciousness, implied consciousness, that is conscious empirical at the transcendental level, and we believe that the proletariat will recognize its historical mission, and the minute the proletariat recognizes its historical mission, the whole world is going to be changed. This is nowadays regarded as extremely irrelevant, extremely outdated, because of the simple reason that in our historical epoch we do not believe in this issue anymore.
Now, in this global crisis we live, how do you think about modernity and illustration and enlightenment? How do you think of modernity and enlightenment?
Modernity, enlightenment is one aspect of the development of modernity. Enlightenment, in a way, prepared the way for the birth of modernity. Enlightenment, however, is only one aspect of modernity. Romanticism is the other aspect. Enlightenment operates with the concept of progress. The world is constantly progressing from the primitive to the complex and to the most elevated, finally to the present consummation of history or a future consummation of history. Romantics think the other way around. They believe that we live in a time of decadence, that our ancestors lived in a more humane world than the world we live in. This is the world of alienation, of reification, and so on and so forth, and everything becomes kind of merchandise, everything goes on the market, everything is a commodity. It's a kind of decadence in comparison with ancient times. Now, you have both Enlightenment and Romanticism. Both constitute the roots of modernity. Both kinds of values are behind the development of modernity, and both characterize modernity till the present moment.
In this way, you say that one main aspect of the social life, the everyday life, is the reproduction, the social reproduction. Do you think that most of the problem with the actual crisis becomes that we are making a negative reproduction instead of positive reproduction, as you said it?
I don't understand the term positive and negative revolution, because revolution means different things when we consider different aspects of human life. When you speak about political revolution, or you speak about industrial revolution, or scientific revolution, or the revolution of women, which is a female revolution, feminist revolution, or you speak of cultural revolution, or you speak about sexual revolution, there are different kinds of revolutions. And all these kinds of revolutions have different kinds of characteristics. And none of them can be described in a way as an anti-revolution or a negative revolution in my mind.
No, I was talking about reproduction.
Reproduction.
Yeah, the social reproduction.
What is negative social reproduction? That I don't understand either.
When the society, instead of forging good people, good citizens, they start to get vicious, get bad habits from the society.
Look, every society reproduces itself. Unless it reproduced itself, our children could not be born and they could not survive. All societies reproduce themselves. The question is on what level they reproduce themselves and how they change in the wake of this reproduction. In the modern world, change is very fast. Our children live in an entirely different world than we were born into, because the change is very rapid nowadays. In everyday life, the change is also extremely rapid. I can refer to very primitive things. For example, there was an exhibition about how cooking and kitchen looked like in the 19th century in Vienna. And I remembered my childhood. It was exactly the same in my childhood. And in the last 50 years, everything has changed. The women's work in the household has entirely changed. The households became technologically differentiated from all other kinds of homeworks. At least we have washing machines, we have ironing facilities, we have artificial fibers, which do not need any ironing, and I can continue everything. And we go to a supermarket to buy a chicken, some piece of chicken. My mother has to kill the chicken on the corridor of the house, because otherwise he could not have meat. So the thing has changed dramatically. That's only one example of the homework of women, how it has changed. Everyday life changed dramatically nowadays. Another thing, I don't know about Mexico, but in Europe, but in all probability also in Mexico, that is, life expectancy has increased very much. In my time, young people died of tuberculosis. Whether they were poor or rich didn't matter. In my time, there were wars, all the time wars. Men were fallen, were killed in wars. In my time, women were dying from childbirth constantly. Now this has all changed. Maybe more in Europe than in Mexico, but still also in Mexico. I'm sure about this. So our everyday life changed. The family structure has changed. Women start to work in the families. I look around. I see two girls here standing and working with you, which was impossible at the time when I was born. Now, women work. And the house is not just supported by the male worker. The male and the female share the obligations of household work. They share also the education of the children. And what about education? Now, I think also in your world, but in my world certainly, in my mother's time, women were undereducated. Very few women went to the high school, and even fewer women went to the university. But when I look around here in Mexico, I see it's no more the case. That is, our everyday life changed rapidly, very fast. In modern times, the more we proceed in modernity, the faster everyday life is changing.
In Europe, the image of Walter Benjamin has been all along this century, but in Latin America, it has been like quite rare because Walter Benjamin is becoming famous. Every student is starting to read Walter Benjamin. What do you think? You were near to this group about Walter Benjamin and the critical school of Frankfurt.
I think Walter Benjamin was a very important thinker, both in critical theory and in his romantic belief in a kind of messianism. He was a very important author and a good writer. He wrote very beautiful books. However, I think I cannot answer the question why exactly now in Mexico Walter Benjamin became so famous. I think rather that in philosophy, as in everything else, there are fashions. That is, well, for a few years, this is the fashionable philosopher, next few years another person is the fashionable philosopher, then again another person. Because there are so many conferences, so many meetings, and when people get together, they have to discuss the same thing. In order to discuss the same thing, they have to read, at least partially, the same thing. There were times, 5 years ago, everyone was full of Hannah Arendt. There was 20 years ago, everyone read Max Weber. 30 years ago, everyone read Karl Marx. And Walter Benjamin, Adorno was a one at time, always the top of interest. You need to have some persons, some writers who are top of interest, because only this way can you, in dialogue, develop your conception, dialogue with others.
Yesterday you talked about the idea of Marx, the Marxism and Judaism. And one of the figures that you didn't talk in your conference, but I know you have some opinion about it, is Gershom Scholem. What do you think about Scholem?
Gershom Scholem, I think it's the most important Jewish philosopher in the 20th century. In the 20th century, not altogether, but in the 20th century. And I think Gershom Scholem had a very important point in discovering the main line of Jewish mysticism. But he was very much interested in Jewish mysticism and in mysticism in general. That was his very original contribution to Jewish philosophy, his work on the Zohar, and not just the Zohar, but also all kinds of mystical thinking of the early medieval and late medieval Jewish culture. And it was very interesting what he said about Israel, in fact, because he pointed back to the last centuries of the history of Judea and pointed at the fact that in Judea there were very different kinds of Jewish religions. Not just the famous and well-known differences between Pharisees and Sadducees, etc., but there were a different kind of shades of Judaism at that time, and Judaism became unified in a way dogmatically only after the destruction of the temple. So he believed that in the contemporary Israel, this kind of pluralism of Jewish religion will return. He had a faith in the rebirth of mysticism, in the rebirth of the ideas of the Zohar, for example. And this was a very important aspect of his work. He and I would say in Martin Buber, because Martin Buber is one of the other important philosophers, Jewish philosopher. Then I say that Gershom Scholem is the most significant. I didn't want to belittle what Martin Buber did at the same time in philosophy. So I think that maybe I could speak also about Martin Buber. Martin Buber's he liked basically to speak about the Bible and speak about Hasidism, that speak about different periods of Jewish history and Jewish philosophy, but he was in a way less a philosopher than some others.
In one of your definitions, when you define everyday life, you say that it's a category that is fundamental of existence, is part of fundamental existence. Do you think that today we can still talk about the idea of fundament and in existence as the way as Heidegger put it?
There are two different conceptions of fundament. When you speak about empirical fundament, I think I would agree with my former statements also that everyday life is the foundation of human life for the simple reason that the social world cannot be reproduced without a single person reproducing himself. And the other way around, without the reproduction of the social world, a single person cannot reproduce itself, and the reproduction of a single person happens first and foremost and prior to everything else in everyday life. When he's thrown into the world, into a family, into a culture, into a certain kind of rules and norms, the person starts to get experiences, had no experiences before having been born, and he has to experience what in the world happens outside of him or her. And this happens in everyday life. That is the first experience of a human creature, which does not determine, but somehow conditions its later experiences, is an experience in daily life. It is an experience how to handle man-made objects, how to speak ordinary language, and how to follow customs, follow prescriptions. This is what every person needs to learn in order to survive. In this respect, empirically, this is the foundation of life. But you can speak about the fundament in another understanding. I would say transcendental understanding, doesn't matter. That fundament means in this respect that we have certain kind of word explanation, which is the foundation of our understanding of a world and understanding each other even in everyday life. Who has created the world? Why is it as it is? What happened yesterday? What's going to happen tomorrow? Where did we come from? What we are? Where are we going? These questions are basically presented in a kind of fundamental world explanation. And prior to modernity, religion was this fundamental world explanation. Everyone had to know the answer. Where did we come from? What we are? Where are we going? Why are we on this world? What is our task in this world? Because in a stratified society, in a monotheistic stratified society, there were ready-made answers to this question. Now, from modernity onwards, you asked a question about enlightenment at the beginning. Modernity onwards, the situation has changed. We uttered the sentence, everyone is born free. Every man is born free. What does it mean man is born free? That we, in a way, do not accept anymore the ready-made world explanation. We have to start an alternative world explanation. That is science. Science appears as an alternative world explanation. That means that we have lost the ultimate foundation. We have lost the ultimate foundation. Because if freedom will become a foundation, freedom is a foundation you see which does not found. Because freedom means that we are free to choose this or that, we are free to do this or that, we can choose our political life, our institution, constitution, our beliefs, our faith, and in this case we do not have really a foundation. And this is why fundamentalism appears. This is why fundamentalism, as an answer to modernity, appears. This is fear of freedom, as once upon a time Fromm formulated. People are afraid of freedom. Freedom means responsibility. Responsibility means I have decided I'm responsible for my own future. I'm responsible for the life of my fellows, etc., of my country, and it's a very big thing, this responsibility. It's heavily on your shoulder. So a lot of people want to get rid of it, want to go back to ancient world explanation, that someone has to tell us what is right and what is wrong. We have we are no more obliged to find out ourselves what is right and what is wrong.
You have been writing a lot on history, philosophy of history. What do you say to those philosophers that say that history is dead? That there is no history?
I think that their philosophers are simply stupid. How can you say that history is dead? Come on, nothing happens here, nothing happens there. I think I live in history, you live in history. Unfortunately, I lived in too much history in my whole life. Oh my God. And what does it mean? History is dead if men are dead. I don't even understand. Who said that?
Francis Fukuyama.
Who?
Fukuyama.
No, he hasn't said. He has said end of history is not that history is dead.
Yes.
That's a difference. He was wrong, but it was not as wrong as that. He said end of history, that is the end of development. The final consummation is modern democracy. It's very utopian, very irrelevant, because we know that totalitarian regimes are always reborn. That democracy has not final victory. Nothing is going to have final victory. Of course, he was wrong, but he doesn't say that history was dead. He said that just we are consumed it. We are at the end of it. And the new thing, Marx said it. Hegel said it. End of history was Hegel. Modern society is the end of history because there is no more structural development. Marx said end of history, but communism is the end of history because it became the real history. It contrasted to previous history, our history. So the end of things became a slogan in modernism. Not just end of history, but also end of art. Yeah, and everything was on the end of philosophy. Everything was at the end. That was a famous slogan and a famous kind of experience of a certain historical period that is also historically conditioned idea.
Although you wasn't studied of Heidegger, what's your position on Heidegger about he becoming part of the Nazi? And although I don't think he was a Nazi, almost narcissistic, but not Nazis.
He was a real Nazi, but you should not forget this. What was the concern of this generation? This generation was disappointed in bourgeois culture. They were extremely disappointed in a world where there is no heroism anymore, when you cannot live and die for something or against something. Everything is petty, everything is small, nothing is great and nothing is huge anymore. So then Nazism appealed to him because a kind of heroism that Siegfried, and you can even conquer the gods, you can be stronger than gods. The deification of man, by the way, was a common idea between Bolshevism and Nazism. Deification of man becomes God because he don't need God anymore because we are the gods. That was very attractive to Heidegger, not just Heidegger. Many people, many others were basically influenced by certain totalitarian promises of a new area of heroism, new area of grandeur, etc., of Führer.
There is a way out of totalitarianism.
Actually,
There is a way out of totalitarianism.
but look, of course there are many ways out of totalitarianism, but there are always ways into totalitarianism. Because totalitarianism is a modern thing, and this is where Hannah Arendt was entirely right. She said totalitarianism has to do nothing about returning to the Middle Ages. It's a very, very modern phenomenon. It's a modern political arrangement. And of course, certain totalitarian countries were collapsing. Nazi Germany collapsed, Stalinist Russia, Soviet Union collapsed. But new totalitarian countries have emerged, and they are coming, new ones, because I think it is one of the political arrangement of modernity, beside democracy, beside autocracy, beside military dictatorship, and I cannot name more of them.
My last question, Hannah Arendt talk about banality of evil, and evil is a big part of your studies. Do you think evil is banal?
No, I think banality it was a bad conception. And it had to do something with Arendt's other view, that the root of evil is no thinking. That is, you do not think. That is, people do not think. That's why evil is on the world, because people do not think. I think that's totally wrong conception, because people do a lot of good without thinking. And not just evil things without thinking, but good thinking without thinking. If a child is calling for help, then you jump and you don't think it whether what will cause you and what will not cause this. Thank you. You jump immediately. Many things you do unthinkingly. That is spontaneously, simply spontaneously. And if you're a good person, then you do the good spontaneously. If you are a bad person, you do maybe the bad spontaneously. Now, there is no way to speak about evil as banal, because the foundational theory is, in my mind, simply wrong. She took it from Heidegger, yeah. But in a way, she radicalized this thought. I remind you on the book which you certainly read, Arendt's book on thinking. Heidegger said, science does not think. Arendt says, scientists do not think. The second sentence makes no sense, because for her, problem solving was not thinking at all. That had nothing to do with thinking. You can say that problem solving, if science is only about problem solving, then science does not do original thinking. You can say that, but the scientists do not think. When they solve problems, that's totally absurd. So, and that she said this kind of absurdities about thinking, taking from Heidegger's conception. It's also problematic, although to answer your previous question, I haven't answered your question. I think Heidegger is one of the most significant philosophers of the 20th century. In my mind, there were three fundamental philosophers of the 20th century. There was Wittgenstein, Heidegger, and Foucault. And they were, all the others were good. They were really good thinkers, but not these determining thinkers. They have determined, in a way, the kind of thinking which developed from the end of the 20th century till the 21st century. So I think he belongs to the most significant thinkers.
Dr. Heller, thank you.
That's all?
That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
But post-metaphysics, you refer to a concern, to a problem which is now relevant. But if we refer to history and class consciousness and speak about the difference between empirical and Zugerechnetes, that is another kind of consciousness, implied consciousness, that is conscious empirical at the transcendental level, and we believe that the proletariat will recognize its historical mission, and then the minute the proletariat recognizes its historical mission, the whole world is going to be changed. This is nowadays regarded as extremely irrelevant, extremely outdated, because of the simple reason that in our historical epoch we do not believe in this issue anymore.
Now, in this global crisis we live, how do you think about modernity and illustration and enlightenment?
We're up there. We do not need to read with pleasure Lukács' history and class consciousness, although we know that basically nothing of his suggestion proved right and can be repeated anymore. So Lukács' position is no more relevant, but the way of his argumentations and the problem he raised, the problem he addressed, remain relevant even if his solutions are no more relevant.
Do you think that right now we can still find solutions that are relevant in this cause, and some call it postmodernity?
Okay, you say there are many suggestions can be considered relevant. When you say postmodernity, you already raised a question, you refer to a concept which is now considered to be relevant. When you speak about
Dr. Heller, what moved you to study about the everyday life? What was the reason why you study everyday life?
It's very difficult to answer this question because there are different kind of motivations. First motivation was the following. Lukács, my teacher in his aesthetics, spoke about everyday relation to reality, but he spoke only about consciousness, about everyday thinking, contrasting it with scientific and artistic presentation. And I came to the conclusion that something is missing here. What is missing here, that everyday thinking is embedded in everyday life. When you speak about everyday thinking, you need to speak about everyday life itself. Second, it was Heidegger. I knew at that time Zeit. And I was really worried about Heidegger's position that in everyday life, you cannot be an authentic personality. That is, everyday life does not give you access to achieve your personality as an authentic personality. And I said something wrong is about this, because I think you can be an authentic personality in everyday life as well. Otherwise, women would have never attained the level of an authentic personality. So that was the third motivation. Women spent almost all their life in everyday life. They were not going out, they were not working on scientific level or on, they haven't created big artistic work, and they could still become authentic persons. So these were the three things which motivated me to think about everyday life at the first place.
The work of Georgi Lucas, History and Social Conscience, is now 90 years old. What's the actuality of the work of Georgi Lucas?
Philosophical work have no such a thing as actuality. Philosophical works, if they are good and deep, they will be always read, even if we think about all matters differently than a philosopher did. Just as we can read Plato, although we do not believe that before our birth we have seen the ideas some